Montana Territory, 1882. The wind cut sharp through the pines as the stagecoach rolled into the muddy main street of Tuckerville, wheels straining under the spring thaw. Opal Vaughn stood beside his chestnut mare, hat low over his brow, watching as the door creaked open and a woman stepped down with a quiet grace that stilled the street around her. She wore a faded blue dress, hem soaked from the road, and carried a small carpetbag in one hand. The other clung tightly to two boys, one maybe 11, the other 8, both with matching brown hair and wary eyes. The woman looked around like she was holding her breath. "Are you Opal Vaughn?" she asked, voice soft but steady. "I am," he said. "I'm Florence Naylor. And these are my brothers, Felix and Francis." Opal took a slow breath, studying her. She was younger than he expected, maybe 23, and something about the way she stood, with those boys behind her, made his chest ache. Not from pity, but from the tired strength she wore like armor. "I thought a mail-order bride would come alone," he said quietly. "I was not about to leave them behind," Florence answered. "They are all the family I have." Opal looked down at the boys, then back at her. "Then I guess I just got myself a whole family," Florence blinked, then gave a small nod. That was the idea. Opal's ranch sat 5 miles out from town, tucked between rolling hills and a split-rail fence that leaned like it had stories to tell. The house was a sturdy 2-room cabin with a loft overhead and smoke curling from the chimney. Florence stared at it from the wagon seat, her hands white-knuckled around the handle of her bag. "It's not fancy," Opal admitted as he helped her down. "It's standing," she said. "That's more than I had before." The boys ran ahead, chasing each other through patches of snow. Florence watched them with a tight smile, then turned to Opal. "They have not known steady ground in a long time. I aim to change that," he said. She looked at him then, really looked into the quiet steadiness in him, the way he kept his voice even, like he knew how to calm wild horses and frighten children both. She nodded once. "I hope you mean that." "I do." That first week passed in slow steps. Florence unpacked what little she had, scrubbed the floor until it shone, and taught the boys how to gather eggs from the henhouse without spooking the birds. Opal fixed the fence, mended the roof, and brought home venison from a quiet hunt. They moved around each other carefully, like two strangers forced to share a dance they did not know the steps to. But every evening they sat together at the kitchen table, the boys between them, sharing stew and bread. And each night, after Felix and Francis were asleep in the loft, Florence would sit by the fire, her face lit gold by the flames, and Opal would sit across from her, hat in his hands. She never spoke of what came before. He did not ask. But sometimes her eyes would drift toward the window as if the past still watched from the trees. It was 2 weeks in when trouble came. Opal had gone to town for supplies. Florence was in the yard, hanging laundry, when a man rode up fast on a gray gelding, dust flying behind him. She froze, the clothespin falling from her hand. He dismounted, swaggering toward her with a grin that did not reach his eyes. "Well, if it ain't little Florence Naylor," he said. She backed up a step. "What do you want?" "Just checking on my property," the man said. "Heard you ran off with some cowboy, thought I should come fetch you." Felix and Francis had come to the porch, eyes wide. Florence stepped in front of them. "I am no one's property," she said. The man laughed. "You were once. Your father owed me for that land. And he promised you in return. That deal died with him. Maybe, but I did not forget." He stepped forward, hand near the gun on his belt. Florence's heart pounded, then a rifle cocked, back away from her. Opal stood a few yards behind the man, eyes cold, rifle steady. "I do not think she wants to go with you." The stranger turned slowly. "This ain't your fight, cowboy." Opal stepped forward. "It is now." The man gave a bitter smile, spat in the dirt, and mounted up. "You will regret crossing me." "Maybe," Opal said. "But not today." That night Florence sat by the fire, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. Opal sat beside her, not across from her this time. The boys were asleep upstairs. She stared into the flames. "That man, he used to come around after our father died, said we owed him. Said I could work off the debt. I ran, took the boys, and left. You do not have to explain, Opal said. I want to. She looked at him, her voice shaking. I did not come here just to marry someone. I came here to keep them safe. You did, he said quietly. You are safe now. Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. You barely know me. I know enough. You took care of those boys when no one else would. You came all this way with nothing but a bag and your will. That tells me everything that matters. She reached out without thinking and touched his hand. He did not pull away. The next day, Opal rode into town and filed a report with the sheriff, making it clear that Florence was under his protection now. He bought her a new pair of boots and a bag of peppermint sticks for the boys. When he came back, Florence met him at the fence. You did not have to do that, she said, holding the boots. I wanted to. She looked at him for a long moment. Why, he did not speak right away. Then he said, because you are mine now, all of you. Florence swallowed hard, and you are ours. He stepped closer. You think you could ever love me? He asked. I already do, she whispered, and when he kissed her, it was not rushed. It was steady and certain, like a promise made under open sky. Spring rolled in full, and with it came laughter from the porch, laundry swaying in the wind, boys chasing each other through the fields. Florence woke each morning with Opal's arms around her, his breath warm at her neck, and she knew she had found home. They built a second room onto the cabin. Felix helped with the nails, Francis painted the door blue. Opal carved a small wooden dog for each boy, their names etched on the bottom. Florence stood in the doorway one evening as the sun dipped low, watching the three of them play with the new puppy Opal had brought home from a neighbor's litter. She felt Opal come up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. You gave me a reason to breathe again, she said softly. You gave me a family. They stood there in the quiet, the wind warm, the sky wide, and everything she had feared was behind her. What lay ahead was love, real, steady, unshakable love. The rains came early that year, soaking the earth until the creek by the southern pasture swelled against its banks. Florence stood at the window after dawn, watching mist curl across the fields. Opal had gone out before first light, the barn lantern swinging in his hand as he checked the stock and the fence lines. She could just make out the shape of him now, moving slow through the fog like a figure out of a dream. Francis stirred behind her on the cot they'd tucked near the hearth for nights when thunder unsettled him. Florence laid a hand on his back, brushing his hair with her fingers until he settled again. The boy had grown quieter since they arrived, but not from fear. It was a different kind of quiet, a watching, a learning. When Opal came in, boots caked with mud and damp settling in his coat, he nodded toward the stove and said, "Creek's near over. I'll need to dig a channel before it reaches the fence." Florence poured hot water over the coffee grounds, then handed him a cup. "Will the horses be safe? They're on high ground. Just need to keep the lower field from flooding out." She didn't offer to help. Not because she had before, but because she was learning when to ask and when to wait. Instead, she said, "Take the boys. They've been itching to be useful." Opal looked toward the loft where Felix was already tying the laces of his boots. "You think they're ready for that? They're ready for more than you know." Opal didn't argue. He never did when she spoke like that. By mid-morning, the three of them were ankle-deep in mud, hauling rocks and carving out a narrow trench with spades and a sharpened hoe. Florence stayed behind to tend the house and dry the laundry that hadn't gotten soaked. She worked with quiet focus until the knock came. It was Mrs. Rourke, coat dripping, cheeks pink from walking the road. She carried a basket of preserves and a folded quilt. "I heard about that man who rode up last week," she said without waiting for welcome. "Word passes fast, even out here." Florence tried to keep her voice even. "We're not expecting trouble." Mrs. Rourke stepped inside like she hadn't heard. "You might not be, but trouble doesn't care about what's expected. You've got children now. You need folk who'll stand near if something stirs." Florence understood what the woman was offering. It wasn't gossip. It was a line drawn in the dirt with friends on one side. She accepted the basket with both hands. "Thank you, we'll remember." Mrs. Rourke nodded, then added, "Heard your husband used to ride with the Montana Stock Guards. That true?" "It is." "Well then, that man who came looking. He'd do well to remember who he's dealing with." She left without another word. Florence stood in the doorway long after she'd gone, the wind tugging at her sleeve. That night, after the boys had fallen asleep in their usual tangle of limbs and blankets, Florence sat at the table rubbing linseed oil into a cracked saddlebag. Opal came in from the barn with a fresh gash on his palm, split open by a jagged stone. She reached for a strip of cloth and a tin of salve. "You need to stop treating yourself like you ain't made of skin," he sat, letting her work. "Boys did good today. Felix thinks he can build a dam now. And Francis wouldn't put the spade down even when the rain started again. Said he wanted to finish what he started." She paused, hands stilling for a moment on his. They never had someone to show them how to do that before. Opal looked down at the wrap she'd tied. "Neither did I." She didn't say anything after that, just set the tin aside and leaned back. He reached out, brushing the oil from her fingers with a cloth. Then he kept her hand in his, thumb grazing her knuckles. "I've been thinking," he said. "About what comes next." Florence met his eyes. "You mean the land, I mean us." There was a long silence, but not uncomfortable, just full. "I didn't come here thinking I'd fall in love with anyone," she said, voice low. "But I did," he nodded once. "I know. I want to build something that doesn't crack when the weather turns. I want them to grow up knowing what steady means. I want you to be the last man I hold hands with." Opal leaned forward, forehead resting against hers. "Then let's do it, piece by piece." The fire crackled low. Outside, the wind had calmed and the fields lay quiet beneath the stars. In the dark above, the clouds had parted just enough to let the moon through. The wheatgrass had started pushing up through the thawed dirt, small green blades catching the morning light in the upper field. Florence stood with a willow basket hooked over her arm, gathering wild mustard near the north fence line. Her apron was streaked with dust at the hem, her sleeves rolled to the elbow. She glanced toward the ridge where Opal was riding slow along the property line, his silhouette steady beneath the wide sky. The mare moved at a patient gait, and Florence could tell he was watching for something, though he hadn't said what. A meadowlark called from the fence post. She listened until the bushes rustled behind her. "It's just me," Felix said, stepping out with a coil of wire over his shoulder. Opal said the far gate's leaning again. "Did he show you how to brace it?" Felix nodded. "Said I'd do it better if I figured it myself." She handed him a clump of mustard. "Then take this back when you're done, I'll need it for supper." He took the bundle carefully, then looked at her a moment too long. "That man's not coming back, is he?" Florence met his eyes. "No." "And if he does, we're not alone now." Felix nodded once, jaw clenched like he was older than his years, then turned and jogged back toward the barn. By the time Florence returned to the house, Francis was at the table carving a piece of pine with the small blade Opal had given him last week. He didn't look up when she came in. "What are you working on?" He frowned at the wood. "A bird. I saw one in the rafters yesterday, want it to look like that." Florence set the basket near the stove. "You'll need to hollow the wings a little. Make them thin so they can catch the air." "I know," he muttered, tongue tucked at the corner of his mouth. She didn't press him. Francis had grown more careful with his words lately, less skittish, more deliberate. That, she saw, was a kind of healing too. That evening, Opal came in later than usual, shirt damp from sweat and mud streaked to his elbows. Florence was peeling potatoes at the table, sleeves back down, hair pinned tight at the nape of her neck. She looked up once, then returned to her task. "There's a set of prints along the south edge," he said, washing his hands in the basin. "Too deep to be ours. Someone walked the fence line maybe 2 days ago." She straightened, brow tightening. "Could it be someone from town? Maybe, but no wagon tracks. Just boots." He dried his hands on the cloth by the door. "I'm going to ride out to the logging camp tomorrow, see if they've seen anything." Florence set the paring knife down. "I want to come." Opal turned to her, surprised. "It's a full day out and back." "I know. But I want to see who's nearby. I want to understand what we're living next to." He studied her a moment, then nodded once. "We'll leave at first light. I'll ask Mrs. Rourke to watch the boys." They rode out just after dawn, the air still cool, the trail damp. Florence kept pace beside him on the dun mare he'd saddled for her, her posture straight, jaw set. The trees thickened as they moved west, pine and birch crowding the trail. Birds scattered from the underbrush, and once they saw a fox dart across the path, its coat soft red in the light. The camp sat low in a clearing, smoke rising from a cook fire, the sound of axes ringing in the distance. A boy of maybe 15 led their horses to the post as they dismounted. A man with a trimmed beard and a limp met them near the tool shed. "You Vaughn," Opal nodded. "Heard you might have had someone passing through. South Trail 2 days back." The man scratched his jaw. "Had a stranger asking for water, said he was heading to the rail spur near Bozeman." Florence stepped forward. "Did he say a name?" "No, ma'am. Wore a coat too fine for a drifter, though." "Left before nightfall?" Opal exchanged a glance with her. "Appreciate the word." They didn't stay long. As they rode back, quiet settled between them until Florence spoke. "What if he's circling?" Opal adjusted his reins. "Then we'll draw our lines wider." Nothing more was said until the house came into view, smoke curling from the chimney. Mrs. Rourke sat on the porch with Francis, who was holding his carved bird in both hands, the wings now smoothed and balanced. Felix was in the field, hammering something into the fence post with a stone. Later that night, once the boys were asleep, Florence sat on the porch steps, shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. Opal joined her, the last of the firelight warming his face. "I'm not afraid," she said, watching the stars. "I know. I was for a long time, but not anymore." Opal rested his arm against the railing. "You've got grit in your bones, Florence. I've got reason to." He reached over and took her hand gently, thumb brushing her wrist. "I've been thinking about the land west of the creek. There's good soil past the cottonwoods. We could plant there come summer." She turned her face toward him. "You mean to stay here for good?" "I've meant that since the day you stepped off that stage." Her voice was quieter now. "Then I want to build something more permanent, not just fences and fields. I want it to be ours, not just yours." He leaned in, brushing his lips against her temple. "It already is." The wind blew soft through the grass, and somewhere in the dark, the fox called again. They sat like that until the chill deepened, and then they went inside, closing the night behind them. The first calf came before dawn, bawling wet and shivering in the still frosted grass behind the barn. Opal had found the heifer low in the hollow, laboring hard, and brought her in under lantern light. By the time Florence came out with a kettle of hot mash, the calf was standing on spindly legs, blinking against the cold. "Healthy," Opal said, brushing straw from his sleeves. Took right to her. Florence set the kettle down and crouched beside the calf. "It's a good start." He watched her rub the animal's neck, her fingers gentle but sure. "We'll need a new pen if more come early. I'll help draw up the plan." "We can use the pine you milled in March." He nodded, then looked toward the house. "Francis has been marking trees again, little notches down by the creek. He says he's building a trail, one that only he and Felix can read." Opal smiled faintly. "That boy's got a head for maps." They stood in the barn a moment longer before Florence straightened. "You'll need rest before the branding starts. Not much time for that now. I'll keep the fire warm." "That's something." She didn't wait for an answer, just left him there with the calf and the quiet smell of hay. By midday, Felix had returned from checking the upper troughs with a gash across his palm and a sheepish look on his face. "Fence wire," he muttered as Florence cleaned the cut at the kitchen table. "You're lucky it didn't go deeper," she said, dabbing the wound with strong-smelling tincture. "You'll wrap it tight and leave it be." "I was careful." "Then be more so." Francis watched from the doorway, arms crossed and solemn. He bled on the new trail marker. Felix shot him a look, but Florence raised a brow. "Then he'll have to carve another." That evening they ate late. Opal had come in from the fields with his hands blackened from soot, having burned back the dry brush near the west slope. He was quiet during supper, chewing slowly, his eyes drawn toward the window more than once. After the boys had gone to the loft, Florence began stacking the dishes. "You're watching for something." Opal leaned back in his chair. "I saw a campfire yesterday, South Ridge. It was gone by morning. Smoke, just a trace, but it wasn't one of ours." She dried her hands on the hem of her apron. "You think it was him? I don't know. Could be a trapper passing through, could be worse." She turned toward him, voice steady. "Then we prepare, not panic. I've already moved the rifle to the back door, hitched the mare in case we need to ride quick." She nodded once. "You'll teach me how to shoot," he blinked. "Now, tomorrow. After chores." He didn't argue. The next day, with the sun high and the wind sharp against their cheeks, Opal set a rusted tin atop a fence post and handed Florence the rifle. Her arms settled beneath its weight, expression unreadable. "Lean it into your shoulder," he said. "Let the gun be part of you." She exhaled, slow and measured, then pulled the trigger. The shot rang out across the pasture. The tin spun and fell. Opal lowered his own rifle. "You've done this before." "Once," she said, lowering the barrel. "Before everything changed." He didn't ask what she meant. He didn't have to. That night, as a soft rain fell and the candle burned low, Francis brought his carved bird down from the loft. He placed it on the table, wings smooth, body balanced upright. "For you," he said, pushing it toward Florence. She touched the wooden tail lightly. "What made you choose a bird? It can fly away," he said, "but it doesn't." She looked across the table at Opal, then back at Francis. "Then I'll keep it here." Right in the window. When the candle burned out and the house settled into sleep, Florence lay beside Opal, her hand resting over his chest. He was already half dreaming, but she whispered anyway. "I'm not afraid of what's coming, not when I have you." He didn't speak. Just turned his face toward hers, his breath warm against her cheek. And outside, everything held fence lines, creek beds, trails carved by small feet and careful hands. The ridge was quiet by midsummer, no sign of the fire Opal had seen weeks before. Each day stretched long and full, the air thick with heat and the scent of dry grass. By late afternoon, the boys ran barefoot through the tall pasture, shirts tied around their waists, their laughter echoing off the trees. Florence had taken to keeping a small journal in the evenings, not for sentiment but for record whether planting, which chickens had begun laying again. She wrote in tidy lines beneath the window, candle stub flickering low, while Opal mended harnesses or sanded down rough edges on the porch rail. "I've been thinking," she said one night, not looking up from the page. "We could keep 2 goats through winter. Milk, maybe cheese, if I can remember how my mother did it." Opal leaned back in the chair, rubbing a thumb along the grain of the wood. "You want me to build a pen or a shed?" "Both, eventually, but pen first." He folded the cloth he'd been using and set it aside. "You always have a plan tucked behind your eyes. That bother you?" "I wouldn't know what to do without it." They didn't speak for a moment, the candle's flame bending with a breeze from the open window. Then Opal said, "The boys are stronger than they look, I know. Felix helped me lift the feed sacks today, didn't even flinch." Florence smiled faintly. "He's been trying to match your stride for weeks." And Francis, he found a split in the water line behind the barn. Plugged it with pitch and bark without being told. She closed the journal softly. "They want to belong, this place gives them something to become." Opal reached across the table, touching her wrist. "You gave them that." "No," she said, voice low. "We did." The next morning, Opal rode out early to help their neighbor, Mr. Tolley, bring in a wagon load of hay before the weather turned. Florence stayed behind, preparing the kitchen for pickling cucumbers. She boiled the jars, sliced dill, and set the boys to washing the vegetables in the basin out back. The day was still when the rider came. Florence saw the dust first, lifting behind a dark horse. She stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron as the figure dismounted and approached. It wasn't the man from before. This one was younger, maybe 25, with a scar across his cheek and a rifle slung carelessly behind his shoulder. "Looking for Opal Vaughn," he said. Florence kept her voice level. "He's away, won't be back till dusk." The man studied her a moment. You his wife? I am. He nodded once, then spat to the side. Tell him Jonah's carver came by, tell him I owe him nothing and he better keep clear of the South Ridge. You've said your piece, she replied. He stared a moment longer, then mounted and rode off without looking back. When Opal returned, sweat-drenched and dusted with hay, she met him at the gate, the sun already sliding behind the hills. Someone came, she said. He climbed down slowly, tying the reins with practiced ease. Who? Jonah's carver, said to keep clear of the South Ridge. Opal's mouth tightened. He used to run with a crew that rustled cattle out of Gallatin Valley. I turned him in once years back. You think he'll try something? He's loud, not smart. But I'll have a word with the sheriff next trip to town. Florence touched his forearm. We're not leaving, he looked at her, eyes steady. Never said we would. That night she sat beside him on the porch, the boys already curled up in the loft with their carved animals tucked under their arms. Crickets sang in the brush, the wind soft over the grass. Do you regret it? She asked. Opal turned to her. What? Taking us in, all of us. He reached for her hand and laced their fingers together. I didn't take you in. You walked in and changed the shape of things. I was scared I'd bring more trouble than good. You brought a life. Trouble comes no matter what. But this, he gestured toward the house, the barn, the quiet land beyond. This is something I wouldn't have had without you. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Tell me something you've never told anyone. He was quiet for a long time. Then, when I was 16, I wanted to leave Montana. Go east, be a carpenter, build furniture in some river town. What stopped you? My brother died that winter. I stayed to keep the land going, never left. She didn't reply right away. Then, would you have gone if he hadn't died? I thought about it for a long time. But now, I know I was meant to stay, so I'd be here when you arrived. Florence closed her eyes, her voice barely above the breeze. I'm glad you did. Autumn came early that year. The leaves turned fast, bright gold and red across the hills. The boys helped harvest potatoes, their hands quick and sure in the earth. The goats came from a neighbor's kidding, small and soft-eyed. Francis named his clover. Felix named his bramble. Florence laughed until she cried. They hosted Mrs. Rourke and her niece for supper one crisp evening, and afterward, while the boys played stick ball beneath the lantern light, Florence and Opal walked the edge of the pasture. He stopped near the cottonwood and took her face in his hands, rough palms warm against her cheeks. Marry me proper, he said. Not just paper from some agency. I want to stand before God and say it out loud. She didn't hesitate. Yes. They wed on a Sunday with the sky clear and the sun slanting through the trees. The preacher came from the next town over, and neighbors brought pies and cider. Felix stood beside Opal, tall and proud. Francis held the rings in a carved wooden box. Florence wore a dress sewn from muslin, simple and clean, and tucked a sprig of dried lavender behind her ear. When Opal kissed her, the world hushed. They danced in the yard until the stars came out. Years passed gently. The boys grew into men. Felix took over the north field. Francis opened a small schoolhouse near the church. The goats multiplied. The barn was rebuilt twice. The house remained, its walls patched and painted, its windows bright. One winter, after the first snow, Florence and Opal sat by the fire with quilts over their knees, the carved bird still resting on the windowsill. She reached for his hand, now worn and calloused by years of good work. You gave me a life I never dared hope for, she said. He pressed a kiss to her knuckles. You gave me everything. Outside, the land slept beneath frost and moonlight, quiet and lasting, and inside they held each other, hearts steady, home whole.